The extraction shears weighed 14 pounds, titanium jaw, hydraulic grip, a bite radius wide enough to sever a cable bundle the thickness of a man's wrist. I had carried them through the gate 3 times already, and the weight had worn a permanent groove into the padding of my right shoulder rig. I set them on the inspection bench and worked the jaw open, watching the hydraulic pistons cycle while I checked the cutting edges for microfractures under the staging bay's fluorescent strips. Across from me, Marsh did what he always did before a rotation: dismantled his sidearm, cleaned parts that were already clean, and put them back together. His eyes stayed on the work. 3 rotations builds a rhythm between men that runs below conversation. We were 60 meters beneath the Abydos dig site in Upper Egypt, inside a reinforced cavity the Army Corps of Engineers had blasted out of the bedrock 14 months ago, after a NASA ground-penetrating radar sweep flagged a structure that should not have existed. The staging bay was military infrastructure, bolted onto ancient stone. A caged freight elevator to the surface, equipment lockers, a medical station with trauma kits and crash carts, a comms desk linked to topside command, and the corridor that led deeper toward the gate chamber. The air recyclers held the temperature at 19 degrees Celsius, but the stone sweated. It had been sweating since they opened this place. Nobody had explained why. Our unit designation was Kingfisher. 4 men, 1 mission type, transit the gate, enter the dead zone on the other side, locate the winged entities the program classified as seraphs, and harvest their wings. The wings were fusion-powered biomechanical assemblies anchored to each seraph's thoracic spine by deep root cables that merged with its central nervous system. Harvesting meant cutting those wings free while the seraph was alive and pinned. A dead seraph detonated. A fusion burst from one would liquidate everything within 40 meters. We had done it 9 times across 3 rotations. 9 seraphs killed, 18 wings harvested, 0 casualties. I had the procedure in my hands the way a surgeon has a favorite stitch. Suppress, restrain, sever, contain. 12 seconds from first cut to casing, if the team moved right. The wings went to a weapons development program outside my clearance. They shipped out in hardened transport containers within hours of each rotation. I had never been told what they were building, and I had stopped wanting to know around the second rotation, when I started dreaming about the sound the seraphs made when the shears bit through the root cables. Riggins. I looked up. Captain Lott stood at the end of the inspection bench with a briefing tablet. He was new, transferred from a signals intelligence program 6 weeks earlier, and assigned command of Kingfisher after Captain Harwell rotated out. This would be Lott's first time through the gate. "Topside confirmed alignment in 40 minutes, he said. "I want final checks done in 30. "We'll be ready." He set the tablet down and pulled up the mission brief. "Quota is 4 complete wing pairs this rotation." I closed the shears and set them on the bench. 3 targets is standard, I said. Harwell never ran above 3. Harwell's recommendations were noted. The program directorate adjusted the requirement based on current demand. 4 complete wing pairs. Marsh's hands paused over his sidearm for half a second, then resumed. "Our mission charter gave abort authority to the commissioned commander unless gate instability, confirmed detonation risk, or total team incapacity forced emergency extraction. Extraction lead could recommend. The officer in command could ignore the recommendation. Topside could overrule both of us. Everyone signed the acknowledgement before their first descent. I had signed it. Marsh had signed it. Broward had signed it with a clean hand and careful penmanship on his first rotation. Behind Lott, Specialist Broward ran diagnostics on the containment casings. Hardened, cylindrical pods lined with Faraday mesh and neural interrupt buffers designed to keep a harvested wing dormant during transport back through the gate. 8 casings stood upright in their carry frames, plus 2 spares. Broward checked seal integrity, buffer charge levels, and emergency purge valves that could flood a casing with electromagnetic static if the wing inside started activating. He was young, capable, meticulous. Second rotation. His first had been clean. 3 seraphs, 6 wings, textbook containment, back through the gate in under 4 hours. He still treated the work like engineering. Lot briefed the team on approach vectors, comms protocol, and extraction sequence. He was precise, professional, and wrong about one detail. He called the activation window 8 to 12 seconds after wing severance, reading from the operations manual. 7 to 10 on my last rotation, I said. Whatever the manual says, the window has been tightening. Lot looked at me the way officers look at NCOs who correct them in front of the team. The manual reflects current program data, Staff Sergeant. The manual reflects data from 8 months ago. Your objection is noted, he said. I picked up the shears and slid them into the shoulder rig. Program intelligence updated on a schedule that had nothing to do with what happened on the ground in the dead zone. Lot did not know that yet, and arguing rank against procedure was a fight I had already lost twice under Harwell. So I checked my subsonic ammunition. Fragmentary rounds, low velocity, designed to damage a seraph's joints without generating enough kinetic energy to trigger its detonation threshold, and kept my count to myself. Marsh holstered his sidearm. His face carried the same flat readiness it always carried before a gate transit. Controlled interior, already on the other side. Casings are green across the board, Broward said. Buffer charges at full. Purge valves tested. Good. Lot slid the briefing tablet into his vest. Kit up. We move to the gate chamber in 20. The corridor from the staging bay to the gate chamber was 200 meters of reinforced tunnel cut through limestone that predated the pharaohs. The walls showed tool marks from the original excavation. Military boring equipment had chewed through stone that already bore older cuts, sharper and more precise, made by tools nobody in the program had identified. Somewhere above us, 60 meters of Egyptian bedrock and the ruins of Abydos separated this tunnel from sunlight, tourists, and the official archaeological record that knew nothing about what NASA's radar had found. I walked point. Marsh came behind me, then Broward with the casings on a drag sled, then Lot at the rear. Our boots rang on the stone floor. The fluorescent strips gave way to chemical light sticks mounted at 10-meter intervals. The gate chamber's proximity disrupted electrical systems, so the last 50 meters ran on glow sticks and battery-powered headlamps. The disruption hit at the 30-meter mark. My headlamp dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The comms earpiece crackled with static that sounded almost structured, almost rhythmic, as if something in the interference was trying to match a frequency. Broward's sled scraped louder on the stone as the corridor's grade shifted into a gentle upward tilt. The engineers had carved this tunnel level. Grade's changing, I said over my shoulder. It does that near the gate, Marsh said. The first words he had spoken in an hour. The corridor opened into the gate chamber, and I heard Lot's breathing change behind me. Everyone's breathing changed the first time. The pyramid hung inverted above us. The chamber was a natural void in the limestone, roughly spherical, maybe 80 meters across. The pyramid structure occupied its center, suspended point down from the chamber's ceiling by forces we could not see. Its base faced upward, its apex pointed at the chamber floor, and the entire mass should have been impossible. It was enormous. The base alone spanned 30 meters, and the stonework was seamless. Blocks, mortar, and joints erased into a single carved formation of dark stone that absorbed our headlamp beams and returned a color I could only describe as deep bruise. The pyramid's interior was visible through gaps in its outer surface. Concentric stone rings, each 5 or 6 meters in diameter, nested inside one another like the mechanisms of a lock. They were turning, each ring rotating on a different axis with a grinding vibration. Sand fell upward from the chamber floor. Fine grains lifted from the stone, drifted in curving streams toward the pyramid's inverted apex, and vanished into the black aperture at its lowest point. The aperture was a hole in space, perfectly circular, perfectly dark, absorbing light without reflection. I had stood in this chamber 4 times, and still couldn't look at that opening without my vision trying to slide off it, as if my eyes were insisting it wasn't there. Gravity competed in this space. Near the chamber walls, I weighed what I should weigh. 10 meters closer to the pyramid, my shoulders lightened. At 20 meters, loose equipment drifted if you let go of it, and your inner ear started lying about which direction was down. Topside, Kingfisher is in the gate chamber, Lot reported over comms, confirming alignment status. Static. Then the comms officer's voice, distant and compressed. Alignment at 82% and climbing. Projected lock in 18 minutes. Corridor metrics coming through now. Lot read the metrics off his wrist display. Transit corridor length, diameter, estimated traversal time, atmospheric composition on the far side. All within normal parameters, except one reading that made me cross the chamber to look at his screen. Corridor is 17% longer than last rotation, I said. Within acceptable variance. What's the acceptable variance? Lot keyed top side. Command confirm corridor length variance is within operational limits. A pause. Variance is within limits, Kingfisher. You are cleared for transit on alignment lock. Lot looked at me. I looked at the aperture. The sand streams were thickening as alignment approached, heavier flows spiraling upward, the grinding of the stone rings deepening into a frequency that pressed against my sternum. 17% longer meant more time in the corridor between here and the dead zone, in the space where geometry loosened, direction became a suggestion, and the walls moved when you weren't looking at them. Broward, keep your casings sealed until we're on the ground on the other side and have eyes on the first target, I said. Don't open them in the corridor. Copy. The rings locked. The sound stopped. The sudden absence of vibration felt worse than the grinding. The silence was pressurized, loaded, like the instant between a trigger pull and the round leaving the chamber. The aperture widened. The black circle expanded until it filled the inverted pyramid's base, and the sand streams became a torrent, a vertical river of fine grain pouring upward into the dark. Alignment lock confirmed, Topside said. Kingfisher, you are cleared for transit. I stepped into the competing gravity and felt my weight halve, quarter, redistribute. I walked toward the aperture on a floor that was tilting itself to meet me. The dark swallowed my headlamp beam at 3 meters. At 1 meter, the beam died completely. Sand hit my boots from below, my chest from the side, my face from somewhere that did not correspond to any direction I could name. I stepped through. The transit corridor was a throat of carved stone, its proportions flexing around us. I moved through it with one hand on each wall, watching the surfaces ripple under my gloves. The stonework flexed in slow, peristaltic waves, as if the corridor were swallowing us. The passage twisted, straightened, twisted again. At one point I was climbing vertically with gravity pulling me sideways. At another, I walked on what should have been the ceiling, while the floor hung above my head. My headlamp cycled through interference patterns, and the comms feed from topside dissolved into structured noise that sounded, briefly, like voices speaking a language built from harmonics and layered tones. It bypassed the ear and pressed directly against the inner skull. The exit point appeared as a change in the stone's color, deep bruise giving way to matte black. Then I was through, standing on a surface that rang like metal under my boots, breathing air that tasted like copper filings and carried a pressure differential that made my ears pop and ache. The dead zone. I had been here 3 times, and the scale still crushed my sense of proportion on entry. The space curved upward in every direction. The mind looked for horizon, sky, boundary, and found only a dark surface marked with geometric seams that ran in patterns too regular and too vast to be natural. The ground extended outward, then bent upward on all sides, as if I stood at the bottom of an immense hollow sphere. Miles across, maybe tens of miles. The seams suggested manufactured flooring, something built and laid at a scale that made human architecture look like insect work. Light came from everywhere at once, a diffuse amber glow without source or shadow. Our bodies threw none, our equipment threw none, The absence accumulated over hours, a wrongness the brain kept flagging and could never resolve. Marsh came through the exit point behind me, then Broward dragging the sled, then Lot. The captain stood still for several seconds, scanning the curved distance, processing geometry his briefing documents had described in clinical language, and his eyes were now failing to reconcile with any spatial framework they had been trained to trust. "Form up," I said. "We're moving to the hunting zone. Stay on the seams. The surface between them is stable, but the seams shift alignment every few hours. If you're standing on one when it moves, you'll break an ankle." We advanced in standard spread formation. 4 men covering a 100-meter front, weapons up, casings on the sled between Broward and me. The ground was warm through my boot soles. The air pressed against my eardrums in slow waves, as if something very large were breathing in a distant part of the structure. The pylon field started 1/2 kilometer from the exit point. I had seen pylons on my first rotation, a scattered handful, 5 or 6, each one a narrow column of dark material about 4 meters tall, rotating slowly in place on an invisible axis, anchored to nothing. Strange, unsettling, unexplained, filed in my after-action report and never addressed by program intelligence. This was different. The field stretched to the limit of visibility in the amber light. Hundreds of pylons, maybe more, arranged in rough rows that curved with the dead zone's upward geometry. Each pylon rotated at its own speed, its own angle. Nailed to each one, spiked through chest, arms and thighs, was a seraph husk. Dead seraphs, stripped of their wings, pinned like specimens mounted for display or warnings posted along a road. The husks were desiccated, hollowed, but the anatomy remained intact enough to read. Bipedal, taller than a man by 1/2 meter, thinner, with fused metallic plating along the sternum and spine that caught the amber light. Their mouths hung open. Their eye sockets were empty. Something had removed the eyes carefully, leaving the orbital bones undamaged. "Christ," Broward said. I had seen maybe a dozen husks on my last rotation, 12, perhaps 15, clustered near the hunting zone's outer edge. Now I was looking at an industrial kill floor. The spiking method was precise. Same configuration, same entry points through the chest and limbs, same dark metallic spikes made from a material my kit couldn't identify. The wing removal cuts on the husk's spines were cleaner than anything my shears produced. Whatever had harvested these seraphs operated at a scale and precision that made Kingfisher look like men catching fish with their hands. Marsh walked among the pylons, counting under his breath. I could see his lips moving. He stopped at 40 and stood still, staring at a husk whose open mouth showed rows of small, even teeth that could have been human. "Staff Sergeant, are you seeing this?" Lot had stopped beside a pylon and was photographing a husk with his helmet cam. "These aren't in any prior AAR. Last rotation, there were about a dozen. This density is new. Who did this? Program intelligence would love to know. Nobody's answered that question in 14 months. Lot looked at me, then at the pylon field receding into amber distance. He was recalculating. I could see it in his posture, the slight stiffening officers get when the situation on the ground diverges from the briefing packet by a margin too large to classify as acceptable variance. "Does this change our approach?" he asked. "The hunting zone is past this field. If pylon density has increased this much, the local seraph population may have shifted too. Fewer targets, different distribution, higher alertness. I recommend we adjust the quota down to 3 wing pairs and extend time on target assessment before engaging." Lot's eyes moved once toward the comms indicator on his wrist display, where Topside was listening. "The quota is 4, he said. "We assess as we move and adjust timing as needed, but the number stands." "Understood." We pushed through the pylon field for another 20 minutes. Marsh stopped counting. The husks repeated the same pattern, stripped, spiked, eyeless, mouths open as if the last sound they had made had been preserved in their desiccated muscles. 5 spikes per husk, driven to uniform depth through sternum center, both radial shafts, both femoral shafts. Whatever had done this worked from a template. Beyond the pylon field, the ground opened into a wide, flat expanse where the geometric seams converged into a pattern like a drainage system, shallow channels cut into the dark floor and radiating from a central point we couldn't see. The amber light was brighter here. The air pressure waves came faster, heavier. Marsh spotted the first live seraph at 200 meters. It moved across the open ground with a hitching, asymmetric gait, its long legs bending at angles that suggested extra joints beneath the metallic plating. It was taller than the husks had suggested, maybe 2.5 meters standing straight, with a narrow torso that widened at the shoulders where the wing roots emerged from its spine. The wings were folded against its back. Even folded, they were enormous, articulated structures of golden veins, dark metallic joints, and dense cable bundles that disappeared into the flesh of its upper spine, where the biomechanical fusion was most intimate. The plating on its sternum caught the ambient light and threw it back in fractured spectra, like sunlight through a cracked prism. Its head turned in slow arcs as it walked, scanning, aware of the space around it with the methodical attention of something that had learned to watch for predators. "Contact, bearing 215, single target, 200 meters," I said, designating target 1. "Copy," Lott said. "Kingfisher, weapons hot. Standard approach. Riggins has the shears." I settled the extraction rig on my shoulder and moved forward. Marsh flanked left with his suppressive weapon. Broward dropped the sled and advanced on my right with an open containment casing, the cylinder's interior glowing dim blue from the charged neural interrupt buffers. We closed the distance. 50 meters, the seraph still unaware. 40, 30. At 25 meters, Marsh and I opened fire simultaneously. Controlled bursts struck the seraph's knee and shoulder joints, subsonic rounds fragmenting against the plating and driving metallic shrapnel into the mechanisms, locking the limbs in contorted positions. The seraph's cry came through our dampening plugs as a deep, shearing vibration that ran through the bones behind my ears. A synthetic undertone beneath something horribly close to a human voice stretched across 3 octaves. Its wings snapped open reflexively, spreading wide, golden veins catching the amber light. The wing roots flexed in the flesh of its spine as it tried to turn, to orient, to find the source of the damage. I hit it from behind. Full body weight, driving it face down onto the dark floor. My knee between its wing roots, my left hand gripping the base of its skull to pin its head. The plating was warm under my gloves. The seraph's body convulsed with enough strength to nearly throw me clear. The muscles beneath the plating were dense, wired with cable, operating at a leverage my weight could barely counter. Marsh dropped onto its legs. Between us we had it pinned, but every second of restraint brought it closer to the detonation threshold. I got the shears on the first wing root. The root cable was a bundle of fused metallic and organic material, the thickness of my forearm, running from the base of the wing into a socket between the seraph's 4th and 5th thoracic vertebrae. I squeezed the hydraulic grip. The shears bit through in 2.5 seconds of sustained pressure. The sound was the worst part. A wet, grinding, tearing report, half bone and half cable, transmitted through the handles into my hands and up into my shoulders. The first wing came free. I threw it sideways, 3 meters clear of the body. The clock started. Second wing. The seraph thrashed harder, detonation warning signs building, a low harmonic vibration in its chest plating, a brightening across the metallic surface of its sternum. I squeezed the shears on the second root, cut through in 3 seconds. The wing separated and I kicked it clear. The seraph spasmed once, a full-body convulsion, then went limp. The sternum glow faded. Dead. Detonation averted. "Broward, casings, move!" Broward was already there. He lifted the first severed wing, 2 meters of articulated gold veins, dark joints, and trailing root cables dragging across the floor, and fed it into the open cylinder. The neural interrupt buffers engaged on contact, flooding the casing with a suppressive field. The wing twitched once inside the pod and went rigid. Broward sealed the casing, checked the indicator lights and moved to the second wing. Green across the board, both wings contained, both casings sealed. Total time from first cut to final seal, 11 seconds, or within parameters. One complete wing pair secured, one of 4. Marsh rolled off the dead seraph and lay on his back for a moment, breathing hard. I wiped the shears on my pant leg and checked the cutting edges. Clean cuts, good hydraulic response. The groove in my shoulder padding was deeper now, the rig settling into tissue and bone it had compressed on 9 prior extractions. Target 1 secured, Lott said over comms. Mark position and advance. Broward loaded the sealed casings onto the sled and checked his remaining pods. I turned to help him and saw something on the ground 15 meters from the kill site, near where the Seraph's left wing had splayed. A fragment, a secondary joint section, a vein about the length of my forearm, articulated at 2 points, with a short length of severed cable trailing from its base. It must have separated during the cut, sheared off when the hydraulic pressure cracked through the root bundle. Secondary fragments were common. The wings were complex assemblies with hundreds of individual components, and a rough extraction always produced rubble. But secondary fragments were inert. The autonomous subroutine that activated in a severed wing required a minimum hardware threshold. Enough processing architecture, enough power cell connectivity, enough cable length to form a functional network. A single vein with 8 centimeters of trailing cable had never carried enough structure to wake up. This fragment was moving. It dragged itself across the dark floor on its 2 jointed gold veins, hitching forward in precise adjustments. The severed cable trailed behind it like wet hair. It moved with purpose. Clear directional vector, clear target. It was heading for Broward. Broward had a gash on his left forearm. The Seraph's plating had caught him during the restraint phase, splitting his sleeve and opening a shallow wound he had taped with a field dressing while I cleaned the shears. The dressing was spotted through, exposed blood, open tissue. Broward, freeze, don't move. He looked at me confused. Then he looked down and saw the fragment crawling toward him, 5 meters away and closing, its veins flexing against the floor with a clicking sound that carried through the dead zone's thin pressure like fingers tapping on glass. I crossed the distance in 3 strides and kicked the fragment sideways. It skidded 2 meters and immediately reoriented, veins snapping flat against the surface, cable whipping around to find purchase. The hardware pivoted back toward Broward with a speed and coordination secondary fragments were never supposed to possess. I pinned it under my boot. The veins flexed against my sole with enough force to shift my weight. This thing was the size of a forearm and fighting me. The cable lashed upward, probing for skin above my boot top, and I felt the tips scratch against the reinforced fabric of my pant leg, searching for a way through to bare tissue. Marsh, suppression bag. Now. Marsh had one open and over the fragment in 4 seconds. The bag's internal field activated, and the fragment went rigid inside the metallic fabric. I lifted my boot. The bag sealed. We tied it to the sled with the casings. What was that? Lott asked. A secondary fragment that activated on its own. Your manual doesn't cover that either, Captain. It lacks the architecture to run the subroutine, but it ran anyway. It locked onto Broward's wound from 15 meters, which means its targeting sensitivity has changed since my last rotation. Lott looked at the suppression bag on the sled, then at Broward's bandaged arm, then at me. Noted. Is your man fit to continue? I'm good, Broward said. He had retaped the dressing and was flexing his fingers to test range of motion. The wound was superficial, but open, and it would stay open for the rest of the operation because field dressings in the dead zone couldn't seal against the atmospheric pressure differential. He would be leaking blood through that tape for as long as we were here. Keep that arm covered and stay behind me during the next extraction, I told him. Copy. We moved deeper into the hunting zone. The second Seraph took 40 minutes to locate. The local population had thinned since my last rotation, consistent with the expanded pylon field. Either the seraphs were being killed in larger numbers by whatever operated those spikes, or they were migrating away from this section of the dead zone. Either way, Target 2 was harder to find, harder to approach, and more alert when we engaged. The extraction was rougher. Marsh took a hit to his helmet from a thrashing wing during the restraint, hard enough to crack his visor. The first wing activated 6 seconds after severance, faster than the manual's window, and faster than my adjusted estimate from the last rotation. Broward barely got the casing sealed in time. The second wing activated in 5 seconds. 5. I had never seen it that fast. Target 3 was worse. The Seraph was larger, its wings showing denser vein structures and thicker cable bundles. The extraction took 7 minutes of sustained violence, the longest I had ever spent on a single Seraph. By the time both wings were in casings, Marsh's cracked visor was leaking pressurized air, Broward's wound had soaked through his second field dressing, and I had pulled something in my left shoulder that made raising the shears above chest height feel like a knife twisting between muscle fibers. 6 wings sealed in casings, 3 complete wing pairs secured, 1 anomalous fragment in a suppression bag, 3 of 4 targets harvested. The team was battered, loaded with heavy equipment, and operating past the point where fatigue starts turning training into guesswork. "Hold position," I said. "Rest, hydrate, check equipment. We're carrying weight, and the exit transit will be harder on the way back." Marsh sat on the dark floor and tipped water into his mouth through the crack in his visor. Broward checked his remaining casings, 4 left, including the 2 spares. Lot stood apart, reviewing his wrist display, his face lit blue by the screen in the shadowless amber light. I drank, rechecked the shears, and tested my shoulder. The pain was manageable if I kept the cutting arm below the horizontal plane. I would compensate. I had done it before. 4 minutes into the hold, Lot walked over. "We need to move. 1 more target, and we're out." "Give the team 10 minutes, Captain. We've been running hard, and the activation windows are shorter than anything I've documented. The wings are behaving differently this rotation. We need the rest." Lot's eyes stayed on his wrist display for a second too long. "Topside adjusted the quota while we were engaged on Target 2, he said. "I received the update during the second extraction." Marsh's water bottle stopped halfway to his mouth. "The requirement is now 5 complete wing pairs," Lot said. "We need 2 more targets." I stared at him. 5. The program directorate authorized the adjustment based on current project timeline requirements. Did they authorize it before or after they heard the windows had dropped to 5 seconds? Lot took a moment to answer. After. 5 Seraphs, 10 wings, with a team carrying 6 sealed casings, a suppression bag, a cracked visor, a seeping wound, and a shoulder injury. In a hunting zone where the targets were scarcer, more alert, and the harvested hardware was activating faster than any rotation on record. Marsh set his water down and picked up his weapon. He checked the magazine. He did not say anything. He did not have to. We had both been doing this long enough to know what 5 meant, and how the math would feel on the way back through the gate. "Broward, seal your casings and prep the spares," I said. "We're moving in 4 minutes." Broward nodded and reached for the sled. His taped forearm left a red smear on the casing he grabbed. He wiped it off with his sleeve and kept working. Lot was already scanning the hunting zone for movement, weapon up. The amber light caught the lenses of his helmet cam, throwing back twin reflections like golden coins laid over empty sockets. We found target 430 minutes deeper than any Seraph I had engaged on a prior rotation. The pylon density was heavier out here, clusters of stripped husks rotating on their columns in slow, staggered orbits, the spikes through their bodies throwing amber glints as they turned. The geometric seams in the floor ran in tighter patterns, converging toward a structural logic I could feel without understanding. The dead zone's architecture had a grain, like wood, and we were cutting against it. The Seraph stood between 2 pylons, wings half spread, head turning in those slow, scanning arcs. It was larger than the first 3 targets. The wing structures carried additional vein segments, 3 articulated sections per primary vein instead of the standard 2, and the cable bundles at the root were visibly thicker, denser, braided in patterns that suggested higher-order fusion architecture. A mature specimen, maybe old. The plating on its sternum had developed a patina of darker metal that the younger seraphs lacked. "That root bundle is going to take longer to cut," I told Lot. "Thicker cables mean more time on the shears. We need to pin it harder and hold it longer. Adjust as needed. Broward, how are your casings?" 2 prepped and charged, 2 more on standby." Broward's taped forearm was soaked through its 3rd dressing. Blood had run down into his glove and dried between his fingers, stiffening the fabric, slowing his grip. He was compensating with his right hand, carrying the casings one-armed, letting the wounded arm hang. Functional. But the blood was still open to the air, and every wing in the dead zone could sense it. "Broward, you stay at 30 meters on this one. Don't advance until both wings are clear of the body and I call for casings. Marsh, I need you on the head and shoulders this time. Full weight, both hands on the skull plate. I'll take the legs and the shears together." Marsh nodded. We had switched positions before when a target's mass demanded it. The configuration was worse for me. Cutting from a lower angle while controlling the legs meant I would have to work the shears one-handed through the thicker root bundle, and my torn shoulder would bear the hydraulic resistance without bracing from the second arm. We closed in. 20 meters, 15, 10. The seraph detected us at 8 meters. Its head snapped around and its wings opened wide, the golden veins flaring in a display that was half defense and half something else. Something that looked like recognition, as if it had seen what we were carrying on the sled and understood what the casings meant. Marsh and I fired simultaneously. Subsonic rounds shattered against the shoulder and knee joints. The seraph staggered, tried to turn, and Marsh hit it from the left while I came low and hooked its legs. We drove it down. The impact rattled through my injured shoulder. I lost grip on the left leg, which kicked free and caught Marsh in the ribs. He absorbed the blow, shifted his weight, and got both hands on the skull plate, pressing the seraph's face into the dark floor. I pinned the legs with my body weight and got the shears onto the first root bundle. The cables were dense. The hydraulic jaws ground into the bundle and met resistance I had never felt before. The material was layered, the deeper cables tougher than the outer sheath, and each bite of the shears produced a vibration that travelled through the handles and into the bones of my forearms. 4 seconds. 5. The bundle was half severed. The seraph's cry tore through the dampeners while detonation harmonics built in its sternum, climbing toward the frequency that meant the fusion core was seconds from threshold. I squeezed harder. The shears bit through. The first wing tore free with a sound like a cable snapping under tension. I threw it sideways, 3 meters, maybe 4, as far as my torn shoulder would allow. The wing hit the ground and activated in 3 seconds. 3. The veins snapped open, the root cables whipped outward, and the entire assembly launched itself across the dark floor toward Broward. It covered the 30 meters faster than I could warn him, skimming the surface on its veins with a speed that made the fragment from Target 1 look arthritic. Broward saw it. He dropped the casing he was holding and backpedaled, but the wing was already on him. Veins wrapped around his torso like golden fingers. The severed root cables found the soaked dressing on his left forearm and punched through tape, gauze, and wound. Gold optical cables, each the width of a heavy sewing needle, threaded into the opened flesh and began burrowing upward through the muscle of his forearm toward his elbow. Broward made a sound I had heard only once before, in a training recording from the program's early phase, when a wing had partially grafted onto a test subject in a controlled environment. The recording had been used to teach containment protocol. Through speakers and playback equipment, the sound had been clinical and distant. In person, 30 meters away, it was a voice trying to form words while its nervous system was being threaded with wire. "Marsh, hold the seraph down. Do whatever you have to." Marsh was already committed, both hands on the skull plate, full weight on the Seraph's upper body. Lot dropped beside him and fired point-blank into its knee joints, locking the legs with fragmentary damage. Between them, they had target 4 pinned. It would hold. Maybe. I sprinted to Broward. He was on his back, clawing at the wing with his right hand, trying to pull the veins away from his chest. The wing's grip was structural. Each vein had locked into position against his ribs, distributing force across his torso, and his good hand couldn't generate enough leverage to peel them open. The root cables had penetrated his forearm to the elbow. Their paths showed as raised golden lines beneath the skin of his upper arm, tracking along the nerve channels, moving with the purposeful speed of something following a map. I dropped onto him, pinned the wing's outer veins with my knees, and grabbed the first cable where it entered his forearm. I pulled. The cable resisted. It had anchored to the nerve sheath with barbed microfilaments that gripped the tissue like fishhooks in muscle. I pulled harder, and the cable came free in a wet, grinding slide, bringing a strip of nerve tissue with it. Broward's body locked rigid. His voice broke into something guttural and airless. I grabbed the second cable, pulled. Same resistance, same tearing, same sound from Broward's throat. 3 cables out, 4. The golden lines under his skin retreated as I severed the connections, but the deepest cables, 2 of them, thicker than the others, already past his elbow and climbing toward his shoulder, had rooted into the brachial plexus. My grip alone couldn't overcome their tensile strength. Lot appeared beside me. He grabbed Broward's shoulders and held him flat while I took the shears to the 2 deep cables. Using extraction shears on human flesh was covered in 1 paragraph of the training manual. I had read it once and hoped never to need it. I slid the jaw along the surface of Broward's arm, feeling the cable beneath the skin, and closed the hydraulics. The cable severed. Broward convulsed. I repositioned and cut the second cable. Both lines went slack. I ripped the remaining lengths free from his forearm in a single pull. The wing still gripped his torso. I pried the veins open one at a time, each one requiring both hands and a boot for leverage, and peeled the assembly off his chest. Lot got it into a suppression bag. The bag's field activated, and the wing went rigid. Broward lay on the dark floor with his left arm destroyed. The forearm was an open wound from wrist to elbow, skin split, muscle torn in tracks where the cables had burrowed, nerve bundles exposed and severed, tendons hanging in frayed ribbons. His hand was curled into a fixed claw, fingers locked in flexion by damaged nerve signals that had nowhere left to go. He was conscious. His breathing came in short, shallow cycles, and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above us in the amber light. I wrapped the arm in everything I had: trauma dressings, compression bandages, surgical tape. Then I splintered it to his chest. He would not use that arm again. The nerve damage was total. Behind us, Marsh and Lot were finishing target 4. I heard the shears, Lot had picked mine up, and the grinding of the hydraulics through the second root bundle. The Seraph died. Its remaining wing went into a casing. 4 targets down. 7 wings in hardened casings. 1 full wing in a suppression bag. 1 anomalous fragment in another. 4 complete wing pairs, if someone counted the compromised wing on paper. The count ignored the condition of the hardware. The count ignored Broward's arm. I left Broward's side and walked to Lot, who was sealing the 4th target's casing with hands that had steadied during the extraction. He had performed well. That made what I had to say harder. "We're done, Captain. Broward is critically wounded. Marsh has cracked ribs from that kick, and his visor seal is failing. I've got a torn rotator cuff. We have 7 wings in hardened casings, 1 compromised wing in a suppression bag, and a live fragment in another. We are leaving. We need 1 more target. We needed 3, then 4, now 5. At what number do you accept that your people are broken?" "The order came direct," Lot said. His voice had changed. Less command, more transmission. "They heard your field reports. They heard Broward's status. Directorate says 1 more. 5 complete wing pairs or the rotation is logged incomplete." "Log it incomplete." The gate is on their clock, Staff Sergeant. The amber light turned the blood on his gloves dark and architectural, like rust on old iron. He looked at Broward, who was sitting upright now with his destroyed arm strapped to his chest and his sidearm in his right hand, ready to move because training had reached places shock had not. "One more," Lot said. "Then we extract. That's an order. You can file your objection in the AAR." I picked up the shears. Lot outranked me, and the program's chain of command was structured to insulate exactly this kind of field decision from the people bleeding under it. Harwell had been different. Harwell had listened. Lot was new, clean, pressured from above, and operating from a briefing packet that told him 5 was the number and the number was the mission. "Broward stays here," I said. "Defensible position. Sidearm and a neural interrupt charge. We go out, find the 5th target, cut fast, and come back for him." Agreed. We positioned Broward against a bare pylon and left him with his weapon, 1 interrupt charge, and enough water for an hour. His eyes tracked us as we moved out. He was alert, trained, frightened. The claw of his left hand curled against the splint. Marsh fell in beside me. His breathing was laboured from the cracked ribs, and his visor was sealed with a strip of emergency tape that wouldn't hold if the pressure differential shifted. We moved deeper into the dead zone, into territory I had never mapped, looking for the 5th Seraph. We found it 500 metres past Broward's position. The extraction was fast, vicious, stripped of everything except the violence the job required. Marsh pinned the Seraph. I cut, first wing free. I threw it as far from us as my shoulder allowed, and Lot had it in a casing before the activation window closed. 3 seconds. Second wing, 2.5 seconds to activation. Lot sealed it with less than a heartbeat of margin. The Seraph died. We had the wings, 5 targets, 10 harvested assemblies, 9 in hardened casings, 1 full wing still locked in a suppression bag, with the anomalous fragments sealed separately. Quota met, if you counted like command counted. Then Marsh said, "Where's the bag?" I turned. The first wing's casing was sealed on the ground beside the dead Seraph. The second wing's casing was in Lot's hands. The fragment bag was still tied to the sled, its field indicator pulsing amber. But the suppression bag that had held the wing we had ripped off Broward, the bag Lot had sealed during the grafting rescue, was open. The field emitter inside was dead. The bag was empty. "When did it get loose?" I said. Lot checked the sled. The bag's seal had been cut from the inside. One of Target 4's gold veins had soared through the suppression fabric during our march. The field emitter had been running on a depleted charge, barely enough to keep the wing inert, and the wing's subroutine had found the weak point and worked it open over 30 minutes of autonomous effort. The wing was gone, and it had a 30-minute head start in the direction of the only wounded man in the dead zone. I ran. Marsh ran. Lot grabbed what he could carry and followed. We covered 500 metres in under 4 minutes. We heard Broward on comms at the 3-minute mark. His voice was confused, slurred, reporting movement near his position. Something on the ground, coming from the west. Gold. Fast. Then his voice changed. The confusion dropped out. What replaced it was the sound from the training recording again. Closer now, more intimate, threaded with a wet clicking I recognized from the manual's clinical description of root cable insertion into spinal tissue. We reached his position and found him standing. Broward's body was upright between 2 pylons. The wing was grafted into his back, veins spread wide behind him like a grotesque ceremonial display, the golden surfaces catching the amber light in panels of liquid colour. The root cables had entered through the base of his spine and climbed the vertebral column. I could see their paths beneath his shirt, raised golden lines running up his back, branching at the thoracic vertebrae, threading outward along his ribs. His arms hung at his sides with a loose, pendular weight, swinging with each motion of his body as if disconnected from intention. His legs moved in small, stuttering steps, the hitching gait of the seraphs translated into human anatomy. the hardware learning to operate joints that bent in fewer directions than the ones it was designed for. His head turned toward us. His mouth opened. A calibration tone came out, a rising frequency sweep that lasted 2 seconds, and then broke apart. Beneath it, tangled in the harmonics, was Broward's own voice. "Riggins, I can't. It's in my back. I can't stop my legs, Riggins, please." His eyes were his, aware, terrified, locked inside a body that was walking toward us with a purpose that had nothing to do with the man behind them. Lot raised his weapon. I grabbed the barrel and pushed it down. Fragmentary rounds near a fusion-linked wing assembly. If that hardware has accessed any part of the Seraph's detonation architecture, shooting him triggers a blast that kills all 3 of us. Then what do we do? Neural interrupt. 20-second window. I go in with the shears and cut the root cables. You couldn't cut them last time. Last time I was pulling cables out of an arm. This time they're in his spine. The approach is different. I sever the wing roots at the surface where the cables enter the body, and we leave whatever's inside him for the surgeons. I looked at Broward. If there are surgeons... Marsh pulled the last neural interrupt charge from his vest. We had 1 shot, 20 seconds. Broward's body was 10 meters away and closing. His hands had begun to rise, fingers extending, flexing, the hardware testing fine motor pathways, learning to use human hands. In another few minutes it would be able to operate his sidearm, still holstered on his right hip. "Deploy the charge!" Marsh activated the interrupt and threw it. The charge hit Broward in the chest, discharged, and his body dropped. The wings folded, the legs buckled. He collapsed onto the dark floor and lay still. The golden lines beneath his shirt dimmed from bright to faded amber. I was on him in 2 seconds. I rolled him onto his stomach and pulled his shirt up. The wing's root cables entered his lower back in a dense cluster. 8 cables buried through the outer muscle layer and threaded between the lumbar vertebrae. I put the shears on the first cable where it met his skin and cut. The cable severed and retracted into the wing assembly with a snap. Second cable, third. I cut as fast as the hydraulics would cycle. 10 seconds gone, 6 cables cut. The wing's veins started to twitch. The interrupt was fading. 7th cable. I repositioned the shears, and the jaw caught on the 8th, which had rooted deeper than the others. It dived beneath the muscle layer and wrapped around the spinal column itself. I couldn't reach it with the shears without cutting into Broward's back. I tried. The jaw slid along the cable. The tip scraped the surface of a vertebra, and Broward's body woke around him with a raw cry. 15 seconds. I pulled the 7th cable free. The 8th held. The wing's veins flexed, spreading as the interrupt field failed across the assembly in visible stages. Outer veins first, then inner joints, then root structure. At 18 seconds, the cables I had already severed began to move. The cut ends, still protruding from Broward's back, reversed direction and pushed into the wounds I had just opened. They re-entered the muscle, found the channels they had carved and threaded back toward the spine with a speed that erased everything I had done in the last 16 seconds. I pulled back. The wing reactivated. Broward's body rose. This time the hands came up fast. The fingers closed into fists and the arms bent at the elbows. The hardware was learning. The head swiveled toward me. The golden lines beneath his skin were brighter than before, as if the interrupted power cycle had triggered a surge in the fusion architecture. "We go," I said. "Riggins," Marsh started. "We go now. The wing has his motor control and it's accelerating. In 5 minutes it'll have his hands and his weapon. We cannot be here when that happens." Marsh looked at Broward's body, which was turning toward the sled, toward the casings, toward the contained wings. The grafted wing wanted to free the others. Every second we stayed brought Broward's hands closer to opening a suppression bag or cracking a casing seal. We gathered the casings and the sled and moved. Behind us, Broward's body followed. The gait was smoother now, the legs bending in a rhythm that was almost natural, the arms swinging in counterbalance. His voice came across the comms channel in fragments. His name, our names, words breaking apart into calibration tones and reforming into pleas I heard with absolute clarity and answered by walking faster toward the gate. The gate's exit point in the dead zone was where we had left it, the black aperture visible against the amber distance. But the corridor beyond it had changed. I had expected this. The transit corridor shifted alignment over time. The gate's geometry was unstable, the connection between Abydos and the dead zone subject to drift. Every rotation, the corridor was slightly different. On my 3 prior rotations, the changes had been minor. An altered angle here, a compressed distance there, a wall that had moved a few meters. The corridor was now vertical. The passage that had been a horizontal tunnel on the way in had rotated 90 degrees. I stood at the aperture's edge and looked up into a shaft of carved stone that climbed straight into darkness. The walls were lined with the same deep-bruised stonework as the pyramid chamber beneath Abydos. The shaft was narrow, 3 meters across, maybe less, and the geometry was already shifting as I watched, walls flexing in slow peristaltic adjustments, distances compressing and stretching in ways that made my eyes ache. "Vertical extraction," I said. "Tether and climb. Marsh, you go first. I'll send the casings up on the line after you, then Lot, then I come last." "What about the hostiles below us?" I looked back across the dead zone. Broward's body was 300 meters out and closing, walking steadily, wings spread wide. Behind him, lower and faster, came 2 loose wing assemblies I couldn't account for, skimming the dark floor on golden veins. Whether they had been drawn by the casings, by the grafted wing, or by some signal moving through the pylon field, I did not know. The anomalous fragment in the suppression bag bucked once against its restraints, as if it heard them coming. "We climb fast." Marsh hammered the first anchor into the shaft wall, clipped his tether, and began pulling himself upward. The stone was solid enough to hold the anchors, but slick, polished by whatever forces had carved it. Every handhold was a negotiation with a material that wanted to let go. I clipped the casings to the tether line in pairs, and Lot hauled them up after Marsh, the cylinders banging against the shaft walls with dull metallic impacts that reverberated into the darkness above. One casing, the unit we had sealed during the second extraction, the oldest container in our inventory, developed a hairline fracture on its 3rd impact with the wall. I heard the neural interrupt buffer inside stutter, the steady suppressive hum breaking into an irregular pattern. The wing inside stirred. A single vein pressed against the casing interior, testing the fracture. "Move the casings faster. We've got a breach starting in number 2. Lot hauled. I climbed. Below me, the shaft's opening framed the dead zone in a circle of amber light. Into that circle came the first pursuing wing, a dark silhouette of jointed gold veins climbing the shaft wall with the articulated grip of an insect, severed cables trailing beneath it, ascending with a speed our climb couldn't match. "Contact below. Wing on the wall, coming up fast." Marsh was 20 meters above me. Lot was 10. The casings hung on the line between them, swinging, clanking. I drew my sidearm and aimed down the shaft. The wing was 15 meters below and climbing. Behind it, the second loose wing entered the shaft, veins gripping the stone, cables whipping for purchase. Farther down, with the slower, heavier rhythm of a body being carried by hardware that had learned to climb, came Broward. I fired. The subsonic round hit the lead wing's central vein and punched through the golden surface, sending the assembly spinning against the far wall. It recovered in 2 seconds, damaged, slower, one vein dragging, and kept climbing. I fired again. The second round cracked the wing's primary joint and it fell, tumbling down the shaft past the other loose wing, cables flailing. It hit Broward's rising body and tangled in his grafted wing. He stopped climbing. The loose wing thrashed against his back, cables intertwining with the grafted hardware, and for a few seconds the 2 systems fought each other for access to his nervous system. Then They synchronized. The loose wing folded against the grafted wing like a second layer of armor, and Broward's body resumed its climb with both assemblies driving it upward. "Keep climbing," I said. "Don't look down." The cracked casing failed. The wing inside punched a vein through the fracture and began peeling the cylinder open from within. Tearing Faraday mesh shrieked through the shaft. The casing was clipped to Lot's harness, and the wing was emerging 6 inches from his hip, veins flexing outward, cables probing for skin. "Lot, unclip casing too. Drop it." He reached for the clip. The wing's cables brushed his glove, and he jerked back, almost losing his grip on the wall. I climbed up to him, grabbed the casing and unclipped it from his harness. The wing inside was half free, veins spread, cables reaching for my wrists. I let go. The casing fell, trailing the wing's extended veins, spinning down past the loose wing and into the dark below. It struck something with a wet metallic impact. Then silence. 8 cased wings remained. The cost of that lost assembly would appear in my report. The cost of Broward would appear in a different section. The shaft narrowed near the top. The stone walls pressed inward, and the carved surface gave way to the raw, inverted geometry of the pyramid structure. The same dark stone, the same bruise-coloured material, rougher here, less finished, as if the builders had worked from the outside in and stopped refining before they reached the core. Light glowed above, the cold blue-white of the staging bay's portable flood lamps spilling through the aperture that connected the shaft to the gate chamber beneath Abydos. Sand fell upward past us in thin streams, gravity reasserting its competing claims. My weight shifted as I climbed, lighter, heavier, sideways, wrong. Marsh pulled himself through the aperture. Lot followed, dragging the remaining casings after him. I was 10 meters below the exit when something hooked my left boot. A vein, gold, jointed, gripping my ankle through the boot leather with a claw pressure that ground the bones of my foot together. The wing had climbed the shaft in silence while I was focused on Lot's casing. Now its cables probed the seam between my boot top and my pant leg, pushed through the gap, searching for skin. I felt the tip of a cable touch my ankle, a cold, precise point of contact like a needle finding a vein. I kicked. The vein held. I twisted my foot and slammed the wing against the shaft wall. The impact cracked the vein's central joint. The grip weakened. I kicked again, harder, and the wing broke free, one vein snapping off against the stone, the assembly falling in a spiral of gold fragments and whipping cables. It hit the wall 10 meters down and caught itself on a single remaining vein. Below it, Broward's body was still climbing, his face tilted upward, mouth open. The sound coming out of the shaft was the calibration tone again, rising, sweeping, hunting for a frequency, with Broward's voice buried somewhere inside it, saying words I could no longer separate from the harmonics. I climbed the last 10 meters with blood filling my left boot from the cable puncture. The wound was shallow. The cable had scratched through the skin, but failed to reach the nerve layer. It had not had time to anchor. I pulled myself through the aperture and rolled onto the gate chamber floor. Sand settled around me, obeying gravity again, falling downward for the first time in hours. "Topside, seal the gate. Seal it now." The stone rings began their counter-rotation. The aperture contracted, black circle shrinking, amber light of the dead zone narrowing to a point. Through the closing gap I could see the shaft below, and in the shaft, climbing, Broward's body. One arm reaching upward, fingers extended, golden wings catching the last light. His mouth still forming words or tones or whatever the hardware had made of his voice. The aperture sealed. The rings locked. The vibrations stopped. Sand lay still on the gate chamber floor, inert, ordinary, subject to a single direction of gravity for the first time since we had descended. Marsh was sitting against the chamber wall. The tape on his visor had failed during the climb, and he was breathing the gate chamber's filtered air, counting his own respirations to confirm they were real. His ankle was bleeding where falling rubble had cut through the suit fabric during the climb, but the wound was minor. Lot stood over the casings. He counted them. He counted them again. 8. Support personnel from topside were already in the corridor, moving toward us with medical kits and transport equipment. The chemical lights glowed along the chamber wall. Beyond the interference boundary, the corridor fluorescents flickered back one strip at a time. The stone walls were dry, carved, ancient, and stable. The chamber held still. They scanned Marsh's ankle in medical, a precautionary sweep for residual subroutine activity, any fragment of the wing's programming that might have uploaded through even brief cable contact. The scan took 40 minutes. He was clean, but protocol required 72 hours of observation. They took him to a quarantine room in the surface facility and closed the door. They scanned my ankle too. The cable puncture was shallow, contact time less than 2 seconds. They dressed the wound, gave me anti-inflammatories for the shoulder, and cleared me for debrief. The debrief lasted 3 hours. I sat in a windowless room in the Abydos surface facility, across a table from 2 program intelligence officers and a civilian contractor with Department of Defense credentials. I reported every detail. The expanded pylon field, the changed activation windows, the anomalous fragment, the wing that had traveled 30 meters in under 3 seconds, the grafting of Specialist Broward, the failed neural interrupt extraction, the decision to leave him in the dead zone, the vertical shaft, the pursuing wings, the lost casing, the cable contact on my ankle. I recommended the program be suspended pending full review of the wing subroutine's adaptive capabilities. I stated for the record that the hardware was learning. Each rotation's wings were faster, more aggressive, and more resourceful than the last. Current containment protocols were designed for a version of the threat that no longer existed. The intelligence officers recorded everything. The civilian took notes on a tablet and asked nothing. My recommendations would be filed. Filed was a word that meant stored, unread, and irrelevant to the next operational decision. Lot filed a separate report. I was told it contained supplemental observations. I was told I could not see it. 48 hours later, a program director I had never met, a different civilian, same Department of Defense credentials, called me to a briefing room. He informed me that my operational recommendations had been noted and archived. He informed me that the next rotation was scheduled in 72 hours. He informed me that the quota for the next rotation had been increased to 6 complete wing pairs. Broward's replacement had already arrived, a specialist named Garza, 23 years old, first rotation, transferred from a munitions logistics unit in Virginia. He found me in the staging bay that evening while I was cleaning the extraction shears. Staff Sergeant Riggins, I'm Garza. I've been assigned to Kingfisher as your new technical operator. He had clean hands and uniform, the eager, professional bearing of a man who had read his briefing packet and believed it contained the information he needed to survive. He looked at the shears in my hands, at the hydraulic jaw stained with material that wasn't entirely metallic and wasn't entirely organic, at the groove worn into my shoulder rig. "What's it like on the other side?" he asked. I held the shears up to the fluorescent light and checked the cutting edges for micro-fractures. The jaw was clean, the hydraulics cycled smooth, the edges were intact. For a moment, I saw Broward's left hand curled against the splint, fingers locked in a claw, and heard his voice breaking apart into calibration tones as we moved toward the gate without him. Then the image passed. I set the shears on the inspection bench, picked up the backup pair, and began the same check. "Make sure your containment casings are rated for the current deployment spec," I said. "The seals from last quarter won't hold. The hardware on the other side has gotten faster since the specs were written. Run your own buffer charge tests before we transit. Don't trust the factory readings." Garza waited. The staging bay was quiet. The freight elevator clanked in its cage, carrying equipment down from the surface. 60 meters above us, the Egyptian sun was setting over Abydos. Over the ruins and the tourists and the official archaeological record that would never mention the pyramid hanging inverted beneath the bedrock, or the gate that opened inside it, or the men who went through and came back carrying golden wings torn from bodies that cried out in frequencies the dampening plugs couldn't fully kill. I picked up the third pair of shears and opened the jaw. "Get your casings checked, Gaza. We go in 3 days."